an impeachment should succeed or fail. We are accordingly not satisfied with the broad proposition advanced by some of the petitioners that the Speaker's mere participation in the proceedings or involvement in political agreements is sufficient to establish constitutional bias or conflict of interest. The constitutional decision makers under Article 145 and Article 150 are members of Parliament and senators collectively acting through the respective houses of Parliament. We therefore find that the allegations of bias, predetermination, and conflict of interest advanced by the petitioners against the Speaker's members of Parliament and senators are, on the material before this court, no more than bare and unsubstantiated assertions grounded in political inference and suspicion rather than in objective evidence capable of satisfying the test authoritatively prescribed in the Rai, Rawal, and Tunoi decisions.
The other main issue relates to public participation. In dealing with this topic, we address ourselves to three distinct but interrelated questions. First, whether the public participation exercise conducted by the National Assembly met the constitutional threshold required under Articles 10 and 118 of the Constitution. Second, whether the Senate, upon receipt of the impeachment motion, was itself obligated to carry out a public participation exercise before voting on the impeachment. And third, whether the public participation was required at the point of nomination and appointment of His Excellency Kindiki as Deputy President. The petitioners collectively contended that public participation in the impeachment process was constitutionally deficient, inadequate, and in certain stages wholly absent, rendering the entire process null and void. Their challenge was mounted at the three levels, and the petitioner advanced, they attacked the National Assembly's public participation exercise as being deficient, both in substance and procedure. They argued that the public was given less than 48 hours to digest complex charges, that the template used reduced their participation to binary support or not support choice, that His Excellency Gachagua's own response was withheld, depriving citizens of balanced information, that many venues were inaccessible, changed without notice, or restricted to party members. They also pointed to defiance of conservatory orders requiring constituency-level hearings, vagueness of the same-day notice of the 5th October 2024, anomalies in the participation report, such as a report support rate exceeding 100%, and tabling of that report moments before the debate. They also concluded that the scale of participation of about 200,000 citizens out of a population of 52 million was negligible and incapable of meeting the constitutional standards. With respect to the Senate, they contended that Senate conducted no public participation at all, no notices were issued, no hearings convened, no submissions received. They emphasized Senate's role was determinative and quasi-judicial, and therefore attracted an independent obligation to facilitate public participation. They argued that this obligation could not be discharged vicariously through the National Assembly, and that by proceeding without its own engagement, the Senate compounded the defects of the Assembly's process and arrogated sovereign power that the Constitution requires to be exercised by the people. Finally, they challenged the approval of H.E. Kindiki as Deputy President and argued that no public participation preceded the vote, yet that approval constitutes what is known as other business under Article 118(1)(b), which requires public involvement. They highlighted the compressed timelines in the Senate impeachment vote on the 17th of October, the nomination of His Excellency Kindiki the same night, and approval by the National Assembly the following morning as evidence that the process was concluded overnight without public input. They distinguished this midterm vacancy scenario from a general election, noting that in elections, the people exercise sovereignty directly through the ballot, whereas in midterm appointments, public participation is the only available mechanism for engaging the people's will. And on that basis, prayed for declaration that the nomination, approval, and appointment of His Excellency Kindiki were unconstitutional. The respondents, quite in summary, maintained that the National Assembly's public participation exercise was adequate, it was reasonable, and fully compliant to the constitutional requirements. They argued that notices were disseminated through the Gazette, through newspapers, through Parliament website and social media, and that multiple channels of participation were available. They defended the 2 to 3 day notice period as reasonable, given the strict timelines under Article 145. They further justified the tick box template as a deliberate design to structure responses and prevent manipulation, noting that citizens could still submit their memoranda or oral views. They argued that participation by over 223,000 citizens was characterized as unprecedented civic engagement, and they dismissed the isolated disruptions as immaterial. They argued that there was no obligation to share His Excellency Gachagua's report with response with the public, since the public's role was to express views, not to adjudicate. On the Senate stage, the respondents, in summary, contended that the public participation was not required as the Senate seats as a quasi-judicial capacity during impeachment and not as a legislature. That Article 118 applied only to legislative business and not impeachment. That impeachment was a single continuous exercise with the public participation required only at the initiation stage. Regarding the nomination and approval of His Excellency Kindiki, they submitted that public participation was not required, that Article 149(1) established a unique self-executing process where the National Assembly voted as an electoral college exercising delegated sovereignty rather than conducting legislative business, that the Constitution's silence on participation in this context was very deliberate, and that elected MPs themselves embody public representation, that the debate was open, televised, and recorded, and they concluded that the nomination, approval, and appointment of His Excellency Kindiki were fully compliant with the Constitution. We have considered the cases advanced by both parties and take the following position on this issue. It is common ground among the parties, and this court affirms that public participation is not merely a procedural formality, but a foundational constitutional value, one deeply woven into the democratic fabric of this nation. It is an expression of the sovereign will of the people, who, by virtue of Article 1, Sub-Article 1 of the Constitution,